Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a framework that is literally revolutionizing elite human performance, shifting us from this old mindset of reactive recovery into a new era of proactive optimization. Whether you're an elite athlete yourself or just someone trying to survive a brutal work week, keeping your body and mind at peak performance is a constant battle, right? Well, today we are unpacking an incredibly insightful approach called the adaptive spiral. We're going to look at this through the lens of NCAA Division I women's basketball, and we'll explore how we can finally stop waiting for our bodies to break down and instead continuously build them up.
So let's start with the elephant in the room. How on earth do elite basketball players survive the absolute meat grinder of an NCAA season without completely falling apart? Think about it. The sheer wear and tear on the joints, the split-second brain-to-muscle connection you need to jump and cut, and the sheer mental grit required night after night. Performance is what emerges from the dynamic interactions of all these elements colliding. It's incredibly complex, and honestly, a condensed season tests the absolute limits of human biology.
For the longest time, traditional sports science relied on a pretty rigid, reactive approach to all this. You wait for a player to get fatigued, you rest them, and then you put them back in. It's very linear, very sequential. But researchers have pinpointed a fascinating alternative, the adaptive spiral. It's a dynamic, history-dependent model. What that actually means is it recognizes that protecting an athlete and pushing them to perform aren't two separate stages, they're co-regulated. This model is recursive, it's continuous, and it is highly proactive. The athlete is constantly adapting to their environment rather than just endlessly recovering from it. And the bedrock of this whole proactive mindset is what researchers call the basketball performance operating system. It's like a three-legged stool. First, you've got culture, the governance, the shared language, the daily standards. Then you have structure, the when and how of the season, zooming all the way out to the macro view and down to the daily micro view. And finally, adaptation, how you regulate external, internal, and perceptual loads. For the adaptive spiral to actually work, these three pieces absolutely have to align. I mean, you can't have elite biological adaptation if your team culture or your scheduling is actively working against you.
Now, the reason it's called a spiral is because athletic readiness isn't some straight line that just goes up or down. It is a continuous, recursive loop. It integrates the athlete's intrinsic factors, the load cycles they go through, and how they express their performance. When you view performance through this lens, you realize that every single game, every practice, and every recovery session is just another turn of the spiral. It's constantly feeding back into the athlete's overall physical state.
To actually master this spiral, athletes cycle continuously through 5 really intentional phases. First up, restore, getting that baseline efficiency back and flushing out lingering fatigue. Second is build, where they expand their foundation by growing strength and metabolic capacity. Once that's built, it's time to prime. These are short, super high-intensity bursts to wake up the nervous system without draining the battery. Then, naturally, they compete. That's where it all comes together. And finally, recalibrate. It's a vital systemic reset before the next intense loading cycle even begins.
Right inside that endlessly repeating loop, the day-to-day grind revolves around 3 core pillars. We call this the performance triangle: capacity, resilience, and expression. And listen, these aren't just corporate buzzwords. They are distinct physical states that must be perfectly balanced. If even one corner of this triangle collapses, the entire performance system goes down with it. Let's break each of these down. Starting with capacity. This is your absolute bedrock. Think of it as the body's ultimate shock absorber. It integrates structural alignment all the way from the head down to the foot, so the body can take a hit, absorb that load, and transfer force without losing mechanical integrity. Stable feet anchor the balance, the hips and trunk absorb the shock, and the shoulders and head align for vision. If an athlete lacks capacity, their body literally cannot handle the mechanical forces of a high-speed basketball game. They will eventually break down.
So if capacity is your foundation, resilience is your shield. This is what holds a player together when the compounding fatigue of a crazy schedule hits them like a ton of bricks. Resilience is all about sustaining stability under repetitive, grueling loads. It's what keeps a player's structural integrity intact during the fourth quarter of the game that just so happens to be their third matchup in 5 days. It is the body's crucial ability to resist the decay of its own capacity.
And then finally, we have expression. This is the ultimate payoff. This is where all that preparation, the neural patterning, and the neuromuscular control translate into real-time competitive execution. It is the exact moment where prep meets pressure, and power blends with precision on the court. Because look, you can have all the capacity and resilience in the world, but if your nervous system isn't primed to actually express it efficiently, you're going to underperform. It's about being able to use the engine you built when it matters most. Which brings us to our next section, the female athlete context, focusing specifically on biological and neuromechanical realities.
When you apply this overarching framework directly to NCAA Division I women's basketball, a really fascinating truth emerges. True performance equity isn't just taking a men's program and copying it. You have to look at female-specific rhythms across 3 specific domains: hormonal and connective tissue, neuromechanical, and cognitive. By understanding these exact modifiers, staffs can move away from generic, cookie-cutter programs and embrace true precision.
For example, let's look at the data around hormones. Variables like estrogen fluctuations literally change a player's tendon stiffness. High estrogen increases joint laxity and slows down collagen turnover. That means during certain phases of an athlete's cycle, they naturally have lower structural stiffness. To counter this, smart practitioners tweak the training on those specific days, maybe focusing on eccentric or isometric exposures, or microdosing the training into smaller, dense bursts rather than one massive, exhausting session.
But you know what might be the craziest finding here? The role of the brain. Believe it or not, academic stress actively leads to slower decision processing and greater movement variability. This literally increases the risk of a non-contact lower limb injury, like an ACL tear, simply because the brain is too mentally exhausted to send the braking signal to the knee fast enough. Crazy, right? To mitigate this, teams integrate dual task work, combining motor and cognitive challenges in practice to keep that nervous system razor-sharp even under heavy mental fatigue.
So how do they track all this unseen stress? Well, sports scientists aren't just relying on standard force plates anymore. They use unilateral in-shoe IMUs, basically these advanced motion sensors built right into the soles of the shoes to get continuous real-world data on gait and load distribution. But surprisingly, their absolute most powerful tool isn't tech at all. It's structured daily dialogue with the athletes. Deliberate conversations uncover contextual clues about physiological stress that a computer chip simply cannot capture yet.
When you chart all this out across a full season, you start to see these really intentional wave-like rhythms. The volume and the intensity, they're never just a flat line. You see these volatile but deeply intentional spikes and dips timed perfectly across the preseason, non-conference, and conference play. This wave structure ensures the athlete is constantly being challenged and then restored, which keeps their central nervous system totally primed without burning their tissues to a crisp.
Ultimately, what this entire data-rich, context-aware framework does is allow coaches to fundamentally change their jobs. They stop waiting for athletes to break so they can fix them. Instead, they proactively regulate the performance environment. By treating things like academic stress or hormonal shifts as predictable variables rather than disruptive surprises, they engineer a continuous state of readiness. Honestly, that's a mindset shift we could all probably use in our own lives, right? It really all boils down to this one incredibly powerful quote from the research. True performance equity is not sameness. It is individualized opportunity grounded in education, autonomy, and belief. Optimizing female athletes means building sex-aware parameters that actually honor their specific biological rhythms, their psychological bandwidth, and their cultural context. It's a profound reminder that real equity in sports science is about providing highly tailored opportunities for excellence. To really drive this point home, the authors use the metaphor of Icarus. Now, usually that myth is a warning, right? Don't fly too close to the sun. But the adaptive spiral totally flips that script. It reminds us that athletes can indeed fly near the sun, but only if their ascent is protected by rigorous, structured preparation. High performance isn't about avoiding the heat. It's about making sure your capacity and resilience are fully developed so you can safely handle the extreme demands of your environment. So I'm going to leave you with this final question to chew on. If we can map out this whole crazy interplay of grueling schedules, connective tissue remodeling, cognitive stress, and hormonal shifts, if we can embrace biological variability as a predictable tool rather than a disruptive surprise, how will frameworks like the adaptive spiral reshape the future of athletic excellence everywhere? It's a complete paradigm shift that changes not just basketball, but the very limits of what we believe the human body can safely achieve. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.